I recently watched Prometheus, the Ridley Scott movie, and I saw it when it came out a few years back. But I was advised to watch this fan edit called the Chaos Edition, which apparently sort of fixed some of the problems with the movie, and I thought I'd give it a go. And to be honest, it did make for a better film, the extra scenes and everything, but it didn't really address the central sort of problems with the movie for me, which have always been that all of the characters are unlikable. You know, there's really no one to root for in that movie. But it did get me thinking about Prometheus, and that ultimately led me back to thinking about Frankenstein, which is what I've got here, obviously. And, the two stories, Prometheus, the myth, and Frankenstein are, linked inextricably, mainly because, Shelley herself, drew the parallel. Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. And then she's got this quote here. This is the facsimile of the title page of the first edition. Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mould me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? It's Paradise Lost, obviously, Milton. It led me to think about why that movie didn't really work very well, in my opinion. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that like it. I'm probably going to get people that tell me that I'm have no position saying this is a bad film. I don't think it's a bad film. I think it's a film that was very ambitious and set out to do a lot and really didn't achieve it. And I don't think it's because the plot's clunky, although it is, and I don't think it's because of the production values, which are outstanding. It is because the characters across the board are not very likeable people, which isn't the case in Frankenstein. You have characters here that are very sympathetic, whereas in that movie they are all deeply unsympathetic. For example, obviously Victor Frankenstein has an equivalent in Prometheus, which is the Peter Wayland character, but he seems a very dark, cold, sort of malevolent sort of a man. Very well played. The actor was superb, but again, not a particularly likable character. And then Vickers, Charlize Theron is absolutely beautiful, but the character she's playing really cold, distant, very stern, very harsh, not likable at all. And then David, who obviously would parallel the creature from Frankenstein, is just villainous, from the outset. I mean, one of the first things you see him do is pry into the dreams of Dr. Shaw while she's sort of in suspended animation, and you think, well, that's probably not what he's meant to be doing. And it's, not, something that is going to endear him to anyone. And then, of course, he does some very, very questionable things. And you don't really get a sense, or I didn't get a sense watching the film, of whether he's doing these because he's been told to do them, or whether he's doing them because, he thinks he knows better. It's interesting stuff, but ultimately, it's not a particularly enjoyable movie for me. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that like it, but I did like Frankenstein. I think Frankenstein obviously is a classic of English literature. And it started me thinking about this, and then that led me back to reading Aeschylus and Prometheus Unbound. So I dug out my copy of that and had a read of that. And I might do a reading of something from that on the channel here, because it's so good. Prometheus, the Titan from Greek mythology, was an opponent of Zeus. He was a champion of man, and he was a divine being, but he wasn't one of the Olympian gods. He was a titan. And there was a great war between the Olympian gods and the titans, and called the Titanomachi. And the titans were thrown down, and the Olympian gods rose to power, and Zeus took the throne on Mount Olympus and became, the king of the gods. And Prometheus was punished for his transgression, which was to, among other things, give fire, which was a thing divine, to mortal men. And for that sin and others, which, were all about giving men other technology, medicines and cures for diseases, the ability to sort of read the future, omination. For those sins, he was chained to a rock, and every day a vulture would be sent down from on high to devour his innards, and then because he was a divine being, essentially a god, he couldn't die, so overnight he would heal, and then the following day the creature would come down again. It's a pretty nasty story, and it's obviously a pretty terrible fate for anyone to suffer. So that's the story of Prometheus, but essentially it's a creation story and it's a creation myth. And so that's obviously why Mary Shelley was drawing upon it for Frankenstein. But what's interesting about Frankenstein that I wanted to sort of make this video about is not necessarily the story itself. If you haven't read Frankenstein, you should read it. It's fantastic. It's, as I say, one of the cornerstones of English literature, one of the earliest science fiction novels. Everyone pretty much knows the story from some version of the story or other, from movies. And, my first exposure to this story was a graphic novel, what we'd call a graphic novel now. We didn't call them that back then, but this is the late 1970s. One of my brothers had a graphic novel version of Frankenstein, which I've never been able to find again and never been able to track down, but it must have been published in the late 60s or early 70s, because it was kind of old then, as I remember. Anyway, I read that and it scared the bejesus out of me. So I didn't read this until I was older. I was at university when I bought this, sort of 92 or something. I think 92 is when this was my copy that I bought when I was studying. Yeah, 92. And I've read this a few times since, probably about 5 times. But what I'd never read, I reread this a couple of years ago. What I'd never read was Mary Shelley's introduction to Frankenstein, which I found fascinating because, I'd started writing my own stories at this point, and this stuff really wasn't of any great interest to me back in the day, but now it is, because in the introduction here, which, as I say, I read for the first time a couple of years ago, she gives probably one of the best descriptions of the creative process I think that I've come across. It's obviously first-hand account of her experience of why she created this story. If you don't know the story of how Frankenstein came to be written, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating story in and of itself. Essentially, Mary Shelley, her husband Percy Shelley, the poet, Lord Byron, and their friend, who I can never remember the name of, Polidori, was it? It'll be in here somewhere. Were on holiday, essentially. They were holidaying in sort of a castle, I guess, on Lake Geneva. And they were reading ghost stories to each other. She tells you all of this in this introduction. And they, having read ghost stories to each other for several nights, they sort of had this bet, a challenge, if you will, to write a ghost story each and sort of, sort of thing that people did back then, I guess. Let's write a story together. And so they all set off to write a story. And I think Shelley wrote a fragment. I think Byron wrote a poem. Polidori wrote a short story, I think, called The Vampire, which I seem to remember reading years ago. And Mary Shelley, went off and wrote Frankenstein. But she gives, in this introduction, which was written some years later, her description of how the story came to her. I'm just going to read you a little bit of this because it's so good. She says, I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror. One to make. There's always a truck going past the window here when I'm trying to read. It's really annoying. One which would make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart. If I did not accomplish these things, my ghost story would be unworthy of its name. And then she goes on, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she talks about the various influences that she had. So she's talking about Hindu mythology. She's talking about Darwin, not the Darwin that we would think of, but Erasmus Darwin, who was sort of a philosopher, who was the grandfather of Charles Darwin. And then of galvanism, and, she'd seen some experiments in galvanism, which was sort of, injecting electrical current into dead, flesh to make, dead muscles work again. And you can see how all of that fed into this story. But what's interesting is that it came to her in a dream. And this is what happens to me when I come up with my stories. They almost always come to me in a dream. I'll be thinking about a story and thinking about a story, kind of what she's laying out here. And I've obviously got lots of inspirations from lots of different places. But then the sort of inspiration for it will suddenly come completely out of nowhere, it seems, the sort of the way it all falls together. And she describes that very well here. She says, night waned upon this talk, and even the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. There's another car. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw, with shut eyes, but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavour to mock the stupendous mechanism of the Creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing, which had received such imperfect animation, would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. I opened mine in terror. The idea so possessed my mind that a thrill of fear ran through me, and I wished to exchange the ghastly image of my fancy for the realities around. And she goes on, but she says, on the morrow I announced that I had thought of a story. And I think that's just absolutely brilliant. It seems to me to be a very close description of what I experience when I go through the creative process, that you can think and think and think about these things, and you can have some really incredible ideas. But the actual spark that sets it all, and sometimes it comes from the weirdest of sources. We just don't know where that comes from. It comes from dreams. It comes from, we call it inspiration, which obviously is, an infusion of spirit from somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? Where's all of this coming from? And that sort of underpinning is present in Frankenstein, that she talks about God, and she talks about Frankenstein's usurpation of the creative sort of role of the divine. And Aeschylus talks about this as well in Prometheus Unbound, which was written 2,500 years ago, but it's the same ideas, the ideas that the divine is the source of all things. There's a passage in Aeschylus where Prometheus, who is chained to the rock at this point, it's Prometheus bound, and he lays out exactly what he did for mankind and why he's being punished. And it makes you feel, as a reader, I've never seen the play, but it makes you feel as a reader a great empathy and pity for Prometheus. Even though he is a god, he's being punished for championing men and protecting them and giving them technology and gifts and all the rest of that. And to me, that is why Prometheus Unbound works, because you feel a great empathy, a great pity, a great sorrow for Prometheus in that play. You feel the same in Shelley's work here. She's very clever. She tells part of the story from Walton's perspective. He's like the framing device, which was quite a common thing in early novels. But then she tells part of the story from Victor Frankenstein's perspective. So we sort of ally and sympathise with him. But then she tells the remainder of the story before she goes back to Walton at the end. She tells the remainder of the story through the creature's eyes and details his experience. And that's a really powerful technique for, making the reader side with a character. And it works because, you don't, I don't speak for other people, but when I read Frankenstein, I feel great pity for all of the characters here. It's a tragedy what happens here. And, there's good and bad on both sides. Shelley doesn't fall into, the sort of tropish writing of villain and hero or antagonist, protagonist. And the framing device with Walton helps that. The whole sort of beginning of the book is letters, epistles, Walton writing back home to his sister, detailing his expedition into the north. And so, the whole opening of the book is really nothing about the matter of the book at all. It just is sort of building the world and setting you into the situation that's that the sort of narrative is going to take place in. It's really expertly done. It's fantastic. To think that she was only 19 when she wrote this, it's an absolute masterpiece. It's great. So if you haven't read Frankenstein, give it a go. I thoroughly enjoy this book. It is fantastic. Cannot recommend it highly enough. If you get a copy of Aeschylus, Prometheus Unbound is also worth a read. It's very short. You can read it in an hour. It's not long at all. And there's some absolutely beautiful prose in there. The translation I prefer is the Edmund Moorehead. It's from the early 20th century. It's really, really nice. He's got a fantastic mastery of prose. His translations are really good. Prometheus, the movie, Ridley Scott's movie. I don't want to talk ill of it, but it's an acquired taste, obviously. I personally don't enjoy the movie, and I think it's because of the things that I've laid out here, that the characters really aren't very likeable. It's nothing to do with the actors. The actors are fantastic, as I've said. It's mostly to do with the writing. But I would still recommend it, because it is a very interesting film, and it raises a lot of interesting questions. And a lot of the questions it raises are questions that were originally, raised in Frankenstein, and obviously date all the way back to ancient mythology as well. So there you go. That's my video. We've talked about creation. It's quite a subject to broach. Anyway. Whilst we're on the subject of books, this is mine. This is Man of Swords. This is me. That's not me. That's my hero, Royer of Catane. And this features a Promethean theme as well. In this first story, Royer is having a vision, and he saw the sacred fire burning on high, the prize of all ether. He watched as a thief, brazen in his cunning, stole the fire and carried it down to earth, where he came before the innocent people yet newborn, and wove it with guile and vanity into their hair, that they might seem the more splendid. And he looked on in terror as the gods of ether descended in wrath, jealous of the theft, and cast down the thief, and cursed the sinful people to their lot of everlasting woe. So yeah, it's this is my book. It's adventures. It's sword and sorcery fantasy, heroic fantasy, traditionally written, traditional style. And as it says here, the first 6 adventures of the mighty hero Royer of Catane. And it's available on Amazon worldwide. So if you like my videos and you've been watching, thank you very much. And give this a look. Check this out. I very much appreciate that. And whilst we're on the subject of omination and the divine gifts of Prometheus, let's just have a quick look and see what the cards have in store for us today. Let's have a look. The tree, good health, near flowers, fulfilment of highest hopes. There you are. Make of that what you will. Anyway, thank you for watching. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.